Great Scott! I made it to 100K! Seriously, thank you guys. I know I already talked about this in the short, but seriously, I am so grateful. And yes, I will be doing the Garfield reviews in April. Now, it's January, 2025 has begun, a new year, new set of reviews, and in the last video, I did say the themes would be a little bit more loose in here, as New Year's Eve is, in the most part, looking forward to the future. So, for this, we are going to look back to the future! Da 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 da. Yeah, I am not gonna play the actual song. I ain't dealing with copyright. But yeah, I'm gonna be covering Back to the Future. But not just Back to the Future as it crosses over with Transformers. Published in 2020, IDW would give us a crossover of two of their IPs at the time, and continuing the trend of creating new toys/characters based around certain movies, like Ectotron in the Transformers Ghostbusters crossover, or USS Enterprise Fortress Maximus for the Transformers Star Trek crossover. And of course, the Batmobile Transformer that we would have gotten in the Justice League Transformers crossover, wasn't for the fact that Dan DiDio had to be a frickin' asshole and cancel it because IDW had no interest in the New 52, but he decided to say, hey, this is Bizarro guy. If you're watching this, it is because I am now filled with unimaginable blind rage. Whatever this is, it must be something that I truly, truly despise, whether it is incredibly stupid or greatly disrespectful, or maybe even both. Either way, I have made this recording so you wouldn't be barraged by a ton and ton of cussing. Hopefully by this point I've calmed down. If not, this video will repeat. Okay, I'm cool. Just so goddamn annoying. Anyway, I've talked about Transformers in the past, so I won't bore you with the details. The abridged version is IDW held the rights from 2005 all the way in the 2020s, leading to probably the most influential comic run of the Transformers. But for more on that, I recommend checking out the reviews for Robots in Disguise and More Than Meets the Eye. As for Back to the Future, it's a bit of a mixed bag. I myself didn't really read much of the Back to the Future comics, though I did check out the first mini that actually dived into the origin of how Doc Brown met Marty, which was a pretty cool story, but the series as a whole, yeah, it really didn't interest me that much. Not saying I hate Back to the Future, in fact, I'm a big fan of the series, but anyone that knows me will tell you that I am not a fan of time travel stories. And though Back to the Future is one of the exceptions, there's just so far you can go with that kind of story. Now, despite the fact that the film is one of the most iconic time travel stories out there, just in case you're one of the few people who didn't see this iconic trilogy, I'll give a little backstory. Released in 1985, directed by Robert Zemeckis, Back to the Future tells a tale of Marty McFly and his eccentric scientist friend, Dr. Emmett Brown, who after years of research would develop the flux capacitor, a device that would make time travel possible. Hooking the device up to a DeLorean, along with a homemade nuclear reactor, Brown would create the very first time machine. Now, unfortunately, things would get complicated as, yeah, the materials he got to make the reactor were from a bunch of pissed off terrorists. Long story short, he scammed them and they were even more pissed. They somehow tracked him down and shot him dead. Marty was able to get away by hopping into the DeLorean, and though he wasn't planning on it, ends up time traveling back to the 1950s. He would get the help from the past version of Emmett Brown, but he breaks it to him that to power the capacitor, they would need 1.21 gigawatts. And unfortunately, the only way they can do that is if they have plutonium, which they don't have. I mean, they could just buy Gilbert U-238 Atomic Energy Laboratory that had real plutonium. Yeah, I'm not kidding, that was an actual thing. Look it up. No, of course not. Knowing his town's history, Marty would recall hearing that the clock tower in the center of town would be hit by lightning, the only other thing that can generate that much power. So, Doc and Marty actually plan a way to harness that power, while at the same time Marty tries to make sure that his parents stay together, because before that he unintentionally ruined the moment that his parents were supposed to fall in love. All while also dealing with his dad's bully, Biff Tannen. Saying this film was a big hit would be an understatement. It was a massive success, spawning 2 sequels and an animated series, which, fun fact, actually introduced the world to Bill Nye, the Science Guy. So, this is a really big franchise and a massive legacy. Can this comic hold up to that? Well, let's dive into Transformers Back to the Future and find out. Warning, spoilers. So our story begins with the beginning and end to Back to the Future, though in the POV of Decepticons Rumble and Ravage, as they're actually watching Marty McFly being chased by a terrorist as he's about to time travel. He's contacting Megatron thinking that he'd get a rise out of this, but he really doesn't care. He's more focused on trying to find ways to beat the Autobots. But that changes as Marty uses the DeLorean to time travel, which then piques Megatron's interest. As Marty returns to the present and Doc Brown reveals that he was actually wearing a bulletproof vest, and Marty heads home, and like in the original film, Doc does plan to head to the future while Marty wants to just hit the hay. Though things get complicated as Rumble and Ravage try to attack them, but unknowingly, they're saved by Bumblebee. Doc heads to the future while Marty sleeps. Though when Marty wakes up, he finds that he's in a very different timeline, as instead of waking up to a wealthy family with successful lives, instead, he finds himself in a future where the Decepticons control Hill Valley, and the humans are forced to harvest Energon. And to make things worse, Biff Tannen, the main antagonist of the first two films, is their coordinator. And though he is a massive asshole to them, especially to George McFly, Marty's father, he's still stuck up instead to Starscream. Marty, not having any of this, tries to fight back against the Decepticon, but yeah, giant robot, turns to a jet, can blast you any second, and he's just a human. But luckily, Marty gets his signature weapon, a skateboard, to flee against the Decepticon, and though things do look a little hairy for him, he's saved by the DeLorean, though instead of being Doc Brown, it's actually a Cybertronian by the name of Gigawatt, who's just taken the form of the DeLorean and gained its powers. Marty at first doesn't trust him, but when Starscream begins to attack him, Marty realizes that yeah, most likely this guy's on his side, and throws a skateboard at him, only to reveal that this skateboard is actually an Autobot by the name of Skills, one of the few Autobots still fighting against the Decepticon regime. The three escape and head back to the future, to 2015. And though in Back to the Future Part 2, it was this cool futuristic world where flying cars were all over the place, this is pretty much just Fallout but minus the zombies. Gigawatt takes him to Delgado Mines, a location that's very important in Back to the Future Part 3, where they are met by the Resistance. And it really ain't much, as the only Resistance left is Rodimus Prime, the last of the Primes in this timeline, and a heavily damaged Bumblebee. Marty wants to know what the hell is going on, and Gigawatt explains. It turns out that Rumble is able to sneak into the DeLorean after the fight and end up in the future with Doc Brown. He tricks him to thinking that he's just some fancy robot from the future and volunteers to help upgrade the DeLorean, not just giving it the ability to fly, but also installing Mr. Fusion, the futuristic power source for the flux capacitor, but also Rumble learning how the DeLorean works. And while he was doing that, he was also secretly contacting the Decepticons in this timeline, and though Megatron does eventually respond, he finds the leader has seen better days. Barely standing, barely functioning, and it looks like he's about to pass out. He tells Rumble that in this future, the Decepticons have no hope in winning, which Rumble takes offense of. He then steals the DeLorean from Doc Brown, and it's back to the past. Not to the 80s, but to the 70s, where he takes Biff Tannen and forces him to help make Energon and find the Decepticons, as just like in the 80s cartoon, they've been sleeping for millions of years. Now you're probably wondering how the hell he was able to find the resources and teach Biff how to make Energon. Now I know, just roll with it. When he woke up the Decepticons, he told him everything, and though Megatron was pleased, he decided that he really didn't need two Rumbles in this timeline, so he destroyed him, and it is revealed that Gigawatt was actually one of the Decepticons that he woke up, as he was tasked to not just study the time machine, but also harvest Rumble's memories, as Megatron did want to know about the previous timeline. Yeah, there's benefits besides, of course, the obvious getting ahead of things. Gigawatt, no longer wanting any part of this, rebelled against his master, scanned the DeLorean, and gained its power to time travel, but was blasted by both Megatron and fellow Decepticon Flame War, damaging his flux capacitor and making it a little harder for him to time travel. While we learn about this, we see what Marty's parents are like in 2015, as both them and Biff are now dealing with the Constructicons, and with that name you can kind of guess that they are able to, you guess it, turn to sports equipment. They're almost squashed by them, but luckily they're saved by Doc Brown, who asks for their aid to save the world. Where has Doc been this whole time? How will Marty and the Autobots stop this future from happening? And how convoluted can this story really get? Well, you're gonna have to read to find out. This comic is pretty good, but yeah, it's a time travel story, so there's a lot to unpack. The comics were written by Kevin Scott, a comic book writer who I actually don't really have that much experience in. I'm aware of some of the stuff he worked on, like Star Wars High Republic, some tie-ins for stuff like Pacific Rim, and Assassin's Creed Vikings, but the only comic of his that I actually read was Titans United, a comic that, I'm not gonna lie, I never finished, mostly because I just found it boring. Luckily for this comic, you can tell that he was having a lot of fun working with these characters and finding ways to call back to the original movies without nostalgia baiting all the time, but I will admit some characters and moments do feel a little forced and even a bit flanderized. And though he does try to explain a few things, like for example, how exactly the Autobots even know the timeline was altered, there are some things that still don't really make sense the more they time travel and the more you look into this. Like for example, why is Doc and Marty totally unaffected by this timeline? How does DeLorean still exist if Doc Brown isn't around to make it? If they still have a DeLorean, why why stick to the 70s? Why not go back in time even further and win the war before it even started? Again, it's a time travel story, so you're going to be asking a lot of these questions, but I don't know. Though the original trilogy did have similar questions like these, there were still ways to answer them without feeling overcomplicated. Moving on to characters, let's talk about, of course, the time travel duo, Doc and Marty. No, I said Doc and Marty. Not that Doc and Marty. Come on, Ruins isn't even here. There we go. Marty McFly and Doc Brown are pretty dead on from their movie counterparts. Marty is the ever-confident, though strong-headed teenager that, though can have a little bit of a selfish thought, in the end will do his best to help people out and take down bullies. I can definitely hear Michael J. Fox's voice out of the character as I'm reading his lines. He doesn't have much of a story arc in here, besides his slight reluctance to trust Gigawatt, given the fact that he used to be Decepticon. And his back and forth with Skills is pretty funny, as Skills is kind of meant to be the Cybertronian version of Marty, while Gigawatt, especially from his dialogue, you can tell is meant to be the Cybertronian equivalent to Doc Brown. Speaking of Doc Brown, yeah, as I said, like Marty, he's pretty dead on, though maybe a bit too gullible when it comes to Rumble, since, yeah, I know he's in the future, so quick to believe that kind of stuff, but still, could be a little hesitant, especially since it doesn't seem to have robots like him in the future. But besides that, he's quick to the draw when it comes to finding ways to fix everything, and is willing to sacrifice himself to help others. As for Gigawatt and Skills, again, pretty solid characters, though I get what they're trying to do, but I feel like they made him a bit too much like Marty, and he doesn't really add anything new to the table, and he kind of fades into the background until the very end. Gigawatt was actually a pretty fun character, as though yeah, his personality is clearly based off of Emmett Brown, he's a lot more regretful in his actions, and all he wants to do is protect Marty and the others, since he feels like they're his responsibility after what he's done. I would say he's more like Emmett Brown in the third movie, who at that point in time really started to question if he did the right thing making the DeLorean in the first place. Next up, we got Rodimus Prime. Rodimus in here is very much like the Rodimus Prime from both the tail end of the Regeneration 1 storyline and also Rodimus from Last Bot Standing. He's not as doubtful as the G1 version, or overly confident like the IDW incarnation. He's more of the grizzled leader who's trying to keep the spark of hope alive despite the fact that everything's telling him that there's no point. Though you do see elements of his previous incarnations in there, especially near the end where it looks like he might find victory, but for the most part, he's a much more calm and calculating character. Next up, we have Rumble, who, I won't lie, never expected him to play such a major role in this story. Like, when I first read this, I was expecting, like, Megatron or Galvatron or some other Decepticon that has messed with time in some way you would expect to show up in the story, but instead, it's one of Soundwave's cassette transformers who has the most critical role in this whole story. And the thing is, he doesn't play himself off as that kind of person. He's very much like Biff Tannen. He's just some jackass who wanted to make it big, though unlike Biff, who at least was able to be the big shot in Back to the Future Part 2, Rumble didn't get that chance. He immediately gets screwed over by his boss, and you almost take pity on him, especially since Megatron, the previous timeline, was treating him like the last hope of the Decepticons. Next up, we got Biff Tannen, who, yeah, he is a sleazeball. Though in here, they do play off his more equal opportunist, which, though isn't utilized that much in the original trilogy, it was always kind of there, given how quick he would act like a nice guy around Marty's dad in the end of Back to the Future 1, to immediately acting like an asshole when it looked like he could actually be a big man. Seriously, the guy flip-flops so often that he makes Cybertron Sideways look consistent by comparison. Still, it does lead to fun comedic moments. As for the rest of the cast, they're okay. Megatron, the rest of Decepticons, though having some pretty fun moments like Starscream's chase in the beginning, are mostly just obstacles for Marty and the team to overcome. And as for Marty's parents, yeah, they just kind of seem very flanderized, especially George. Yeah, he was timid in the original film, but by the end of the first film, the dude had a spine. Sure, I can buy him not wanting any trouble for his family, but still, him acting so timid throughout the whole story just felt really off. Then there's Marty's brother and sister, who plain just don't do anything in the story, but better than the rest of the cast of the movie, since Strickland, Biff's goons, or even Jessica, Marty's girlfriend, are not in the story. I even went back to see if maybe they were just background characters, but nope, not even that. Just kind of feels like a waste. You could do a lot with these characters. Like, I don't know, have Strickland be this grizzled resistance leader, making sure his soldiers don't slack off, or Jessica helping Marty's parents out as they get older in the future. Just saying, there was potential for them. The art was done by Juan Samu, who, like Scott, isn't unfamiliar with comic tie-ins. He also worked on Star Wars: The High Republic, did tie-in comic for the 2019 Addams Family movie, and also did Elvira Meets Vincent Price. Okay, I gotta check that out at some point. And did have experience working on Transformers, and his art here was pretty cool. I absolutely dug the design for Gigawatt, and though some of the characters do look a bit too cartoony, you can still tell who they're supposed to be. The only character design I really didn't feel for was Skills, as, I don't know, something about his design just didn't gel with me. Maybe he looked too thin, maybe it was the color scheme since he also kind of looks like he's supposed to be a Decepticon. Like, I really don't know, just something about it doesn't work for me. But that could just be me. Besides that, his art was pretty solid. On a whole, Transformers Back to the Future is a pretty fun crossover. I don't think the story is going to make you a lover of time travel stories if you're not already. Again, how they use time travel will lead to a lot of questions, but if you just want to turn off your brain and go on a fun adventure, you're definitely going to get that. If you're just looking for that, well, I would say roll out, but where they're going, they don't need roads. Thanks for watching. Like, share, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for updates, and check out my Blue Sky account if you want to follow me outside of YouTube. Next time, we follow the themes of people dealing with the past to move on with their future as we wrap up Zero Man for all seasons. Later.